What 1989 showed us was the Chinese people wanted freedom. They wanted personal dignity. They wanted liberalization of the Chinese system. And that had been happening for a while, but they were afraid it was going to be reversed.
It's my great pleasure to be speaking with Professor Andrew Nathan of Columbia University, a distinguished political scientist whose extensive scholarship has focused on China over many decades. Andy, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Sharon.
Can you reflect on and describe what you think the significance of the 1989 democracy movement was at that time, and how much do you think it represents the aspirations of the Chinese people at large?
So at that time, Mao had been gone for 13 years, and Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening was underway and had been underway for 10 years. And in 1988, I visited China, and I could sense that people were very unhappy about a lot of things, including corruption and inflation. Price reform had been tried and then pulled back, and a sense that the reform process had lost its way. People understood that the China faced two roads, one toward conservatism and one toward reform. They wanted reform. So I think what 1989 showed us was the Chinese people wanted, if not Western style democracy, because it's hard to say exactly what they had in mind. They wanted freedom. They wanted personal dignity. They wanted liberalization of the Chinese system. And that had been happening for a while, but they were afraid it was going to be reversed.
What do the Tiananmen Papers tell us about what compelled the CPC leadership to see this democracy movement as such a threat that it really needed, to call out the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, on the people, and to have to crush this movement militarily and kill unarmed civilians?
Well, Zhao Ziyang, who was the member of the leadership at that time who wanted to continue on a liberalizing path, argued that the students who are hunger striking in Tiananmen Square and the people who are demonstrating to support them just want the same things that we, the ruling party, want. We want patriotism. We want the country to do well. We can listen to the people. They're patriotic. They're not trying to overthrow us. But to answer your question, I think we should quote the words of Li Peng, who was the guy in the active leadership who persuaded Deng Xiaoping to crack down. And Li Peng's answer was, if we allow the students to negotiate with us, if we open up our doors and start negotiating with one group of the population, we'll have to negotiate with every group of the population, and we have a vast population with many demands. And our model of rule, which is one party, elite, top-down rule, that will completely disappear. Deng Xiaoping and others around him did not want to change that model, and that's why they cracked down.
Do you see any possibility of really a tolerance for or a support for a more democratic public space and a civil society space?
So the time period we're talking about leading up to June 4th, there really were different groups in the party. You could use the word factions if you want to, disagreeing about the future direction of the country. In my assessment, today that is not the case. Xi Jinping has gotten rid of everybody who's more liberal than him and everybody who's more conservative than him and everybody who doesn't completely support him in the power structure. I mean, I do not see an alternative line of argument within the party leadership that things should be more liberal, more open, or more democratic.
If you look at the developments of what is happening in Shanghai and Beijing and other cities with respect to zero COVID and the reemergence on the Chinese internet of is not dissent, is just anger. Do you think that's going to start playing a role, or is it already, on Xi Jinping's hold on power as we move forward?
So one of the risks that's faced by a very authoritarian system like this is that the government is responsible for everything, and people are not allowed to express dissatisfaction, and policy is very difficult to change. And so Xi Jinping, I would respect his intention at the beginning of pursuing zero COVID, that this is good for the people, and the Americans have lost 1 million dead, and we don't want our people to die because we love our people and all that. He's backed himself into this position where he can't adapt, because he seems to feel that if he adapts, he's going to be admitting that he was wrong before, and the legitimacy of his leadership depends on his never being wrong. And in politics, you can't never be wrong. You're always going to be wrong sometimes. So, but on the other hand, this is not the first time that people in China have been very angry. 1989 was one time. The Sichuan earthquake was one time. The melamine scandal, where baby formula was poisoned with melamine, some chemical component, that was another time. People get angry a lot in China. So people's attitudes are complicated, right? Human beings are very complicated. So I think in one sort of layer, if you will, of people's thinking in China is that this regime cannot be overthrown and cannot be changed, and I have to live with it. Another layer is I'm angry about the conditions of my life. Another layer is the system is ridiculous, the zero COVID and propaganda control and so forth and so on. So there are all these layers. And the mystery for us is how long can it go on like that? And my sort of accumulated experience as a human being is it can't go on like that forever.
In your view now, today, is it important for the world to continue to mark the anniversary of June 4th? And then why would that be important? And is there a possibility, and how do you think that would happen for the party to actually reassess June 4th? Or is that the crack that would then be the floodgates?
Well, I think it's important to remember June 4th for two reasons. One is kind of academic and analytical, is that June 4th happened, and it was important. It was important in showing us what the Chinese people wanted. It was important in showing us how the Chinese Communist Party works. It was important for clarifying the road that the party chose, which has led us to where it is today. And the second reason it's important to remember it is more of a moral or normative reason, which is that we do need to continue to stand up for the principle that shooting innocent protesters is a violation of human rights. Will the verdict on June 4th ever be reversed? I don't think that the party will reverse it voluntarily, because I think the very reason that they cracked down on June 4th is the same reason that they won't reverse it, because if they do reverse it, then they sort of let loose all the forces that challenge the model of rule that the party prefers, which is one party, highly centralized authoritarian rule. But I do think that when the day comes, and we don't know when, it doesn't seem to be soon, that the party reaches its own dead end and confronts a crisis and has to again make the choice between liberalization and dictatorship, and decides to go the road of liberalization, then that will lead eventually to an opening up of history, of all of PRC history and all of Chinese history, to independent inquiry. And at that point, I think people will come out and explain what really happened on June 4th. And there will be debates, and eventually the government will, say, acknowledge the truth.